I'm Edward Funk, podcast 68, titled Loretta Young Shoots It Out with Studio Head Darryl Zanuck. But before I dive into that, a couple things. Notice this beautiful bud vase. My niece Natasha gave that to me for a recent birthday. I'm 78, so being of the fossil that I am, I could not even begin to think what it takes to produce a podcast. So she's my producer. And if you have any desire to do a podcast and need a very intelligent producer, it's Natasha Funk, and contact her at whitenoiselevel3@gmail.com. whitenoiselevel3@gmail.com. And I'll remind you again at the end of this podcast. Okay, now I'm going to dive into things. Okay. John Ford was one of Hollywood's most esteemed directors and was at the helm of John Wayne films that are considered classics. He directed Loretta's next film, 4 Men and a Prayer, and Loretta recalled, "I thought he was a man's director, and I don't think it thrilled him any more than it did me to work together. I prefer to think Frank Capra, and he preferred a Marino Hara. He didn't like it when he thought I took too long to change costumes. So one day, he grabbed the corner of the set dressing room, which was on wheels, and shook it. He only tried it once, because to scare him, I let out a yell and then moaned and groaned as if I'd fallen and broken every bone in my body. I kept it up for 3 or 4 minutes. Finally, I quieted down and said, I'd like the doctor to come over, which he did. He found nothing wrong, of course, and finally, I came out to a very subdued director. We both knew that I was one up on him. 3 Blind Mice followed, co-starring Joel McCrea. And there's a dancing scene in 3 Blind Mice in which Loretta wears a white evening dress designed by Adrian. The gown features a low back, and watching movies years later, Loretta recalled how the makeup people wanted to put makeup on her back. Pancake makeup is dull and makes the skin powdery. This is Loretta speaking. Without makeup, your skin shines, and I like the clean look of it. So I never let them put that on my back. I just wouldn't stand still long enough to let them get it on. Defending her willfulness, Loretta said, you wouldn't last in this business or any other if you did everything someone told you to do. Now, the big budget at Kentucky, a Romeo and Juliet story, was set against the bluegrass landscape of thoroughbred horse country. Of course, she never left Los Angeles, but Loretta recalled, it was a Technicolor picture, and we decided on a lot of blue ribbons in my hair, hoping my eyes would take on a blue hue, and they did. Irene made a very pretty suit for the races. It was very slick looking, with colors that were different tones of my hair. This attention to detail did not go unappreciated. One reviewer from the New York Times said, in color, Loretta Young is a beautiful Kentucky belle. Her lensing intense will be accepted of the best of any actress today. So quite a compliment. Now, a good friend of mine, Monica, who's just started listening to these podcasts, she said when I'm turning the page to take a little break because the sound of the paper would drown out what I'm saying. So that's what I'm doing. Okay. Wife, doctor, nurse with Wonder Baxter had been a hit, so writer Natalie Johnson quickly concocted another story called Wife, Husband, Friend. Loretta reflected, at the time, I thought I was just a divine comedian. You have to think that people like you, or you can't do it. But recalling Wife, Husband, Friend, Loretta stated, it wasn't anything. Come to think of it, I did an awful lot of pictures that weren't anything. Anything is a relative word. Loretta's movies made money, and her contract was to expire in 6 months. Zanuck knowing that Myron Selznick provided Loretta with the toughest representation in the business, was prepared to offer Loretta $2 million for a 5-year contract. We're talking 1939. Loretta's response came in a crucial meeting in which Zanuck and Joe Shank, and he's the money man behind the studio, they were trying to cajole her into signing this new contract. Myron Selznick was at Loretta's side. She recalled, Joe said to me, Loretta, why don't you want to resign? I said, I'll tell you why. It's because of Darryl. He's never raised my salary. He's never anything. Tyrone tells me that he's had 4 raises. I just don't want to go on being treated that way. And I don't like the parts. I'm sick of Lloyd's of London and Suez parts, all these little nothing parts. That's no way to build my career. I want to keep going up, and I know I can. I can do that, but not under Darryl Zanuck. He doesn't make women's pictures unless you're 6 years old. She's referring to Shirley Temple. Or you can skate. She's referring to Sonja Henie. I'm going to go back to where she said her pictures were nothing. What she meant, she was looking for these movies with a dramatic story. She wasn't appreciating really how good she was at romantic comedy. But anyway, that was her problem. Finally, Darryl said, Loretta, you never asked for a raise. Tyrone has gotten these raises because he fought for them. There was no sense of honor in a contract for that didn't mean anything to him. I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I don't want to have to deal any longer with someone I have to fight with all the time about everything. It's too discouraging. Myron hadn't said one thing. Finally, he said, all right, Loretta, that's enough. You can go now. We'll finish. I got up and left the office. Myron simply told them she doesn't want to resign. And so that's it. Loretta recalled a later visit with the Selznick brothers, both Myron and David. Of course, we know David from Gone with the Wind. That was happening about the same time. Anyway, David tried to talk me into reconsidering Zanuck's offer. He said, Loretta, it's a good studio. And Darryl really hasn't. What happened? I skipped a page. Okay, I appreciate your patience. Here we go. Darryl really hasn't done too badly so far. I replied, but I see no real stardom in my future with him. If I'm ever going to make any move, now is the time. David warned, you know, Darryl can be awfully cruel when he wants to be. He's a hot-headed man, and you've really hurt his pride. Now, the script for the story of Alexander Graham Bell had not yet received its final okay before my expiration date on my contract would arrive. So when Zanuck became aware of that fact, he simply opened the picture 2 days prior to my 7-year contract and hooked me into the picture. I guess the rule was if you start a picture when your contract is still active, then you have to finish it. Then 3 days later, he closed to finish preparing for the real starting date, which was 3 weeks later. A neat little trick all spelled out in my contract, a crummy thing to do, but not beneath Darryl's tactics. Now, one pleasant dividend of doing the story of Alexander Graham Bell was the opportunity of working with all 3 of her sisters. Loretta was to play Mrs. Bell, and they were all playing Mrs. Bell's sisters. Loretta said, I like, okay, I went to check on them when they were getting their hair done, and I didn't like what they were doing with Sally. She gave me a look that said, butt out, but I didn't because it looked so terrible. Later, Sally said to me, I just think it's terrible because the hairdresser worked on me for an hour. I asked her if she liked it. She said, well, no, but she worked so hard. Sally was and always has been more people-oriented than me. When the story of Alexander Graham Bell wrapped, Loretta's contract was finished. Loretta recalled, Myron's told me, I'm going to get you $100,000 per picture, your first picture out. I was delighted. Nevertheless, I remember saying, great if it's a good part, but remember, it's the part that I'm interested in. Loretta was 26 when she left 20th Century Fox. She had been a leading lady for over a decade, and 3,000 independent theater owners had just selected her their biggest box office star. Note here, when you say independent theater owners, you're referring to saying small towns and medium-sized cities. In Loretta's romantic life, she was seen writer Joe Mankiewiz. She recalled, he was one of the cutest looking men I've ever seen. His major works, A Letter to Three Wives, All About Eves, Suddenly Last Summer, all led of them when we dated in the late 30s. Joe had been one of many men I started seeing when Tyrone was still in the picture, but ultimately I got tired of the battle of the door she's talking about, Joe Mankiewiz. He just couldn't understand why I didn't want to go to bed with him. Let me drop some names here. I was at a party in Montecito, I being me, and one of Bob and Dorothy's guests, Mitchum, Bob and Dorothy Mitchum's, it was a wedding anniversary. I was standing next to Stuart Whitman and told him that I was working on a book on Loretta Young's life. He then quoted director William Wellman saying, no one in Hollywood broke more hearts than that little Catholic girl, Loretta Young. In the next podcast, Loretta discovers that David Selznick was correct when he warned her how vengeful Darryl Zanuck would be. Yeah, now, if you want to do a podcast and you like Natasha's help, go to whitenoiselevel3@gmail.com. whitenoiselevel3@gmail.com. And just go there anyway to see what she has to say on the page. Thank you.